A billionaire handed a homeless single mother a biometric-locked digital wallet with unlimited funds and disappeared into the rain. Less than 30 minutes later, the first alert pinged on his encrypted phone. It wasn't a luxury hotel booking. It wasn't a spending spree at a designer boutique. It wasn't even a withdrawal for thousands in untraceable cash. It was a transaction so small, so mundane, that it shattered his $15 billion worldview instantly. In that moment, Roman Sterling knew there would be consequences because she had just made a choice that would expose the lie he had lived for 37 years. Roman Sterling had long ago traded his soul for logic. As the 37-year-old CEO of Apex Corp, a global AI and robotics conglomerate, he reigned over an empire built on the belief that humanity was just a series of predictable algorithms. From his glass-walled penthouse overlooking the city, he watched the world through a lens of cold data. His father, Silas Sterling, had hammered a singular gospel into him since he was old enough to walk. Trust is a system error, Roman. The poor aren't victims of fate. They are victims of their own bad choices. Give them a drop, and they'll drown you trying to take the ocean. Roman carried that cynicism like a suit of armor. Every charitable act by Apex Corp was a calculated PR move, a tax hedge, a line of code meant to optimize the brand's image. He had never once looked at a person in need and seen anything other than a bad investment. But on a Tuesday morning draped in a freezing gray mist, the ice in Roman's chest finally cracked. He was cutting through the Grime Street transit station, rushing toward a high-stakes merger, his assistant trailing behind with a tablet full of $100 million contracts. Roman's Italian wool suit was worth more than the average annual salary, the vintage watch on his wrist, a gift from Silas, ticked with the rhythm of a man who owned time itself. His phone buzzed incessantly with alerts from board members and investors, all demanding a piece of his brilliance. Then he saw her. Huddled against a damp concrete pillar near the platform sat a woman, barely 30, with bone-deep exhaustion etched into her features. Wrapped in her arms was Chloe, a 6-year-old girl shivering in a tattered sweater, clutching a piece of cardboard that read, "Single mother. Lost everything. Please." The woman's grip on the child was like a fortress made of nothing but desperate love. Roman felt his father's voice sneer in the back of his mind. She chose this life, Roman. Don't look. But Roman didn't just look. He stopped. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the sleek, biometric lock tablet that held the keys to his digital vault, and knelt in the dirt. The Apex Corp headquarters rose 60 stories above the city, a jagged monolith of glass and brushed steel that seemed to pierce the very clouds. Inside, the air was filtered to a clinical perfection, devoid of the scent of rain or humanity. Roman Sterling stood in his office, a space defined by sharp angles and expensive emptiness, where the only sound was the rhythmic, mechanical ticking of his father's vintage watch. It was a relic of Silas Sterling, a man who had viewed the world as a series of cold equations and social Darwinism. On Roman's desk, a holographic interface flickered to life, playing back the digitized journals Silas had left behind like a haunting inheritance. Empathy is a system error, Roman, the recorded voice rasped, sounding like dry parchment. The masses don't want a hand up, they want a hand in your pocket. To rule, you must remain the architect of logic. Roman watched the data streams of his AI empire, billions of dollars in code and robotics, feeling the weight of that gospel. He was the most successful man in the country, yet he lived in a fortress of high-tech isolation. Every window in his office stretched 12 feet high, offering a panoramic view of a world he looked down upon but never touched. He was a man who understood the price of everything and the value of nothing, drowning in the shallow water of his own curated perfection, waiting for a variable he couldn't predict to finally break the silence. The sleep began to fall, turning the Boston morning into a gray, industrial blur. Roman's armored sedan sat idling at the curb near the Back Bay Transit hub, a mechanical hiccup in the engine forcing a rare delay. "Stay with the car," Roman commanded his driver, stepping out into the biting wind. He didn't mind the cold. It matched the temperature of his own thoughts. As he cut through the station to reach his alternate transport, the scent of damp wool and desperation hit him. There, beneath the flickering neon of a platform sign, he saw them. Maya was a shadow of a woman, her face smudged with the soot of the city, her eyes wide with a bone-deep exhaustion that no AI could simulate. She held Chloe so tightly it seemed their hearts might beat as one, the girl's small hands tucked into the thin sleeves of a ragged sweater. Roman stopped, his $8,000 Italian suit a jarring contrast to the grime-streaked tiles. He felt the heavy weight of Silas's watch against his wrist, a silent pulse of cynicism. "The poor are especially dangerous," the memory of his father's voice hissed. "They'll take everything." An arrogant impulse, sharp as a glass shard, pierced Roman's logic. He pulled the biometric tablet from his briefcase, the crypto key to an empire. "I want to see if my father was right about you," he whispered, extending the device toward Maya's trembling hands. 24 hours. No limits. Just choices. The rain lashed against the 60-story windows of the Apex Core penthouse, a rhythmic drumming that offered no comfort to the man standing in the dark. Roman Sterling didn't turn on the lights. The blue luminescence of his tablet was the only sun in his sterile universe. He sat in a chair of Italian leather that felt as cold as a tombstone, his eyes fixed on the live transaction feed of the digital wallet. He was waiting for the inevitable. In his mind, the ghost of Silas Sterling sat across from him, a phantom smirk playing on his lips. "Watch closely, Roman," the memory hissed. "Watch her reveal her true nature." He anticipated the surge, the 5-figure withdrawal at an ATM, the frantic swipe at a high-end boutique, or perhaps a sudden, glowing charge from a luxury car dealership. Part of him, the part forged in his father's cruel image, almost hoped for it. He wanted the notification to scream of greed, so he could finally close the book on humanity and retreat back into his world of predictable algorithms. He wanted to feel right, more than he wanted to be kind. But the screen remained stubbornly dark. Midnight passed, then 1 a.m, and the master app showed nothing but a stagnant balance. The silence of the city below was mirrored in the digital ledger, a tension so thick it felt like drowning in shallow water. He gripped his father's watch, the ticking a countdown to a betrayal that refused to arrive. The digital silence broke at 3:14 a.m. A sharp, rhythmic chime echoed through the hollow penthouse as a single notification illuminated Roman's face. He sat upright, his fingers tightening around the cold metal of his father's watch. "Here it is," he thought, a grim satisfaction coiling in his chest. The first crack in the dam. He expected to see a charge for a luxury hotel, or perhaps a high-end electronics store, something that would prove Maya was just another data point in Silas Sterling's map of human greed. But as he swiped the screen, the data that materialized felt like a physical blow. CVS pharmacy number 0422, total $37.84. Roman leaned into the blue light, his brow furrowed as the itemized digital receipt scrolled upward. There was no champagne, no designer perfume. Instead, the ledger listed a bottle of pediatric fever reducer, a pack of electrolyte solution, and a bottle of multivitamins. He stared at the numbers, the logical world he had built beginning to tremble. This wasn't a heist, it was a rescue mission. Through the lens of his Apex tech, he could almost see the fluorescent hum of the 24-hour pharmacy, the sterile aisles where a desperate mother was finally buying the air her daughter needed to breathe. For the first time in 37 years, the cynical gospel of Silas Sterling felt like a lie. The $37.84 charge was a small, human number that felt more vast than his billions, and Roman felt the first jagged crack spread across the ice of his heart. The dawn broke in a bruised purple over the Boston skyline, but Roman Sterling's eyes never left the glowing map on his terminal. The GPS, tethered to the digital wallet, pulsed like a steady heartbeat, moving through the labyrinth of the city. He watched the icon drift toward a department store just as the doors opened, and minutes later a notification flickered. Blue winter parka, $42. Roman leaned back, his Italian wool coat suddenly feeling heavy and suffocating. He adjusted the settings on a nearby street-level feed. The high-resolution optics of Apex Corp's urban network knitting together a grainy mosaic of a sidewalk. There they were. Maya emerged from the steam of a subway grate, her posture still guarded, but her movements had a new, frantic grace. Beside her, Chloe was transformed. The child was swaddled in a bright blue coat, the faux fur lining of the hood framing her small face like a halo. It was the only splash of color in a world of gray concrete. Roman waited for the GPS to turn toward the gold-leaf storefronts of Newberry Street or the heated lobbies of the waterfront hotels, but the signal defied his father's logic. Instead, the pair moved with quiet purpose toward the heavy stone arches of the public library. They weren't seeking a palace. They were seeking a sanctuary where the heat was free and the silence was respectful. As he watched the two small figures disappear into the vast, quiet halls of books, Roman felt the cold certainty of his empire beginning to thaw. The digital pulse of a tracker moved across the city map like a rhythmic heartbeat, drawing Roman's eyes toward the department store at the edge of the commons. He waited for the inevitable, the high-end jewelry counter, the designer shoes, the indulgent leather. Instead, the screen flickered with a modest charge, $42. Roman leaned into the blue glow of his terminal, his brow furrowed. He adjusted the satellite feed, the high-resolution optics of Apex Corp's urban network knitting together a grainy mosaic of the sidewalk below. There they were. Maya emerged from the steam of a subway grate, her posture still guarded, but her movements possessed a new, quiet grace. Beside her, Chloe was transformed. The child was swaddled in a brand-new blue winter coat, the fur-lined hood framing her small face like a halo of safety. It was a sharp, defiant splash of color against the gray slush of the Boston morning. Roman watched the GPS icon, expecting it to veer toward the gold-leaf storefronts of Newberry Street or the heated lobbies of the waterfront hotels. But the signal defied his father's cynical logic. Maya and Chloe moved with singular purpose away from the luxury districts, heading instead toward the heavy stone arches of the public library. They weren't seeking a palace. They were seeking a sanctuary where the heat was free and the silence was respectful. As the two small figures disappeared into the vast hall of books, Roman felt the certainty of his empire beginning to thaw, the $8,000 coat on his own shoulders suddenly feeling like a lead weight. The rain had slowed to a rhythmic drizzle by the time Roman arrived at the designated meeting point, the air heavy with the scent of wet asphalt and iron. He expected Maya to be late. Perhaps lingering in the warmth of a hotel room he assumed she had finally booked, or buried under shopping bags. Instead, she was already there, standing beneath the rusted overhang of a transit station with 4 hours still remaining on the digital clock. Chloe stood beside her, a small beacon of hope in her new blue coat, clutching the oversized panda, Barnaby, to her chest. When Maya saw him, she didn't smile. She approached with a solemn, quiet dignity that made Roman's expensive Italian suit feel like a costume. She held out the biometric tablet, her hand steady despite the cold. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "I'm so sorry. I know I spent so much. I tried to be careful, but she was so cold and the fever." Roman looked down at the device, then back at the woman whose bone-deep exhaustion was being replaced by a fierce, protective light. She was returning an unlimited fortune with a sincere apology for $42 and some medicine. The logic of Silas Sterling, the belief that desperation makes thieves of everyone, shattered completely in that silence. He reached for the tablet, his fingers brushing hers, and for the first time in 37 years, the billionaire CEO of Apex Corp found himself unable to speak, his heart a fractured vessel of sudden, overwhelming humility. Roman stood in the shadow of the station, the biometric tablet heavy in his hand, but it was the small, crumpled roll of thermal paper Maya pressed into his palm that finally broke him. He unfurled the receipts, the cheap, curling edges clashing against the fine Italian wool of his $1,000 sleeve. His eyes scanned the modest line items, the medicine, the blue coat, a single gallon of milk, and the stuffed panda. Then his breath hitched. At the very bottom of the ledger, dated just an hour ago, was a final transaction, a $100 donation to the Mass Avenue Emergency Shelter. He looked at Maya, then at the child clutching the panda, Barnaby. This woman, who had spent the last year shivering in subway tunnels and counting pennies for bread, had used the first moment of unlimited wealth to ensure another mother might have a bed for the night. She had been more generous with his money in 24 hours than he had been with his billions in a lifetime. The ghost of Silas Sterling, with all his warnings about the inherent greed of the poor, was silenced by a $100 charge on a grocery store receipt. Roman realized then that Maya wasn't a bad investment. She was the most valuable asset he had ever encountered. His hands began to shake as the cold, logical world of Apex Corp dissolved, replaced by a raw, stinging humility that left him struggling to breathe in the damp morning air. The flashbulbs of 100 cameras
Empathy
danced
isn't
against
just a
the glass
buzzword,
walls
it's
of
a
the new
strategy.
Sterling
The
Foundation,
ROI of empathy
but
is
the glare
real,
no
and it's
longer
how
felt
we
cold
win.
to Roman. He stood at the podium, the sleek silhouette of Apex Corp visible in the distance, a reminder of the empire he had successfully pivoted from cold surveillance to human empowerment. In the front row, Maya sat with a quiet, regal poise, her simple green dress a vibrant contrast to the sterile corporate uniform surrounding her. Beside her, Chloe, taller now and beaming, clutched a well-loved, slightly faded stuffed panda named Barnaby. Maya wasn't a guest. She was a director, the woman who had taught a billionaire that resilience was the most undervalued currency in the world. Roman reached to adjust his cuff, his fingers pausing at his bare wrist. The vintage watch, Silas's heavy legacy of cynicism, was gone, locked away in a drawer where it could no longer pulse against his skin. He looked directly at the lenses, his voice steady and devoid of the old, clinical frost. "For years, I was taught that the poor were a risk to be managed," Roman began, his gaze softening as it met Maya's. "I was wrong. True leadership isn't about protecting wealth. It's about investing in the invisible strength of those the world has overlooked. Today, we launch a new metric for success. We call it the ROI of empathy, because the greatest return on investment isn't found in a ledger, it's found in a life given the chance to flourish."